It was a Friday night, and I wasn't doing much, just lounging around when I got a text from my neighbors, Ben and Rachel. They live next door, and we've always been pretty close. You know, the kind of neighbors you can borrow sugar from and not feel weird about it. We've done the whole dinner and drinks thing before, so when they invited me over for a barbecue, it didn't seem like anything unusual. "Hey, we're grilling tonight. Want to come over?" Ben texted. I was already settled in for a lazy night, but I wasn't going to pass up good food, especially since Rachel is one of those amazing cooks who makes everything taste like it came from a five-star restaurant. The whole day, though, something felt off. It's hard to explain, but you know that weird feeling in your gut when something's not right? I couldn't shake it, but I just chalked it up to being tired. Anyway, I texted back, "Sure, I'll be over in 10. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and headed out. It was a short walk since their place was literally next door. As I approached, though, I noticed something strange. Normally, their dog, Milo, would be at the window, barking his head off. But tonight, total silence. No Milo, no barking, nothing. When I knocked on the door, Ben answered with a smile, but something about it seemed off. It didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, come on in," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked into the living room, expecting to see Rachel prepping dinner, but she was just sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. She turned and smiled at me, but it felt forced, like she was distracted by something else. "Hey, glad you could make it." "Yeah, thanks for inviting me," I said, trying to ignore the weird vibe in the room. But it wasn't just me. The house was too quiet, like someone had hit the mute button on life. "Where's Milo?" I asked, trying to make conversation. Usually, their dog would have been all over me by now. "He's outside," Ben said quickly, waving it off. "He's been acting strange today, so we put him in the backyard." That didn't sit right with me. Milo was like their kid, always inside, always close by. But I didn't want to push it, so I just nodded and sat down. We started talking about random stuff, work, weekend plans, but something about the way Ben and Rachel were acting kept bugging me. They were both different. Normally, they're super relaxed, but tonight they seemed tense, like they were waiting for something. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to relax as I sat on their couch, but something about the house felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the vibe was off. You know how some places just feel warm and inviting? This wasn't one of those times. Everything felt tense, like the air was heavier than it should be. "So, what's for dinner?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Rachel glanced at Ben before answering, her voice a little too casual. "Oh, we're making burgers. Should be ready soon." Normally, she'd be bouncing around the kitchen, chatting and laughing while prepping food, but she stayed seated, just picking at the edge of the couch cushion. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up with them. Every time I asked a question, they'd share these quick glances, like they were silently talking to each other about something they didn't want me to know. And then there was that damn quiet. Their house was always noisy, Milo barking, the TV on in the background, the sound of them cooking in the kitchen. But tonight, it was dead silent. Too silent. I tried to keep the conversation going, but they weren't biting. Rachel kept fidgeting with her hands, and Ben looked distracted, barely making eye contact with me. It was like they were on edge, waiting for something to happen. And it wasn't just them. The whole house felt off. The lights were a little dimmer than usual, and the shadows seemed to stretch a little longer. Then I noticed something strange. The basement door, which was usually closed, was slightly cracked open. I'd never really paid attention to that door before, but tonight, it felt like all my focus was drawn to it. It was like the room was trying to tell me something wasn't right down there. "What's with the basement?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but inside I was already regretting bringing it up. Ben's reaction was almost immediate. He stiffened, and Rachel stopped fidgeting. "Oh, nothing," Ben said quickly, his voice too calm. "Probably just forgot to shut the door all the way. No big deal." But it was a big deal. Something about that basement was wrong, and I could feel it in my gut. I wasn't the type to freak out over small things, but the more I looked at that half-open door, the more uneasy I felt. I was about to suggest we head into the kitchen to get dinner started when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the basement. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again, a little louder this time. It wasn't just a creak of the house settling. It was deliberate, like something or someone was down there, moving. "You guys hear that?" I asked, my heart picking up a little. Rachel's face went pale, and Ben shot her a look. "It's probably just Milo outside," Ben said too quickly. "He's been digging a lot lately." But that noise? It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from right below us. That scratching sound was getting under my skin. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, like someone or something was trying to get out. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept drifting back to that sound and the cracked basement door. Something about it just felt wrong. Ben must have noticed me staring, because he quickly stood up. "I'll go check on Milo," he said, his voice a little too calm, like he was trying to keep things normal. "He's probably just scratching at the back door." Rachel nodded, but she didn't say anything. She was still pale, her fingers nervously tapping on the arm of the couch. I watched as Ben walked past the basement door, but he didn't go outside. Instead, he paused, glanced at me, then pushed the basement door shut, as if he were trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It felt more like he was trying to hide something. He came back and sat down, but now the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. I wasn't the only one who felt it. Rachel was barely holding it together, and Ben kept glancing at the basement door, even though it was closed now. "So," I said, trying to break the awkwardness, "you guys haven't been down in the basement today, have you?" The question hung in the air like a bad smell. Rachel's eyes widened a bit, and Ben immediately shook his head. "No, why would we? I just thought I heard something coming from down there," I said, my voice trailing off. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That sound was too deliberate to ignore. "Nah, it's probably just the house settling," Ben said, waving it off with a forced laugh. "This place is old. Sometimes it makes weird noises." I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I heard, and I could tell they knew too. That's when the power flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to make us all freeze. The lights dimmed and then came back on, but in that brief moment, the entire atmosphere changed. I wasn't imagining things anymore. Something was wrong. Rachel let out a nervous laugh, but it sounded shaky. "Well, that's creepy," she muttered, trying to make light of it, but I could tell she was scared. Her hands were trembling now, and she wouldn't look at either of us. The scratching sound came again, louder this time, like it was right beneath us. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "All right, seriously," I said, standing up. "What's going on?" Ben sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. For a moment, it looked like he was going to come clean, but then he shook his head. "It's nothing, man. I swear. You're just hearing things." But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. Without thinking, I walked over to the basement door. It felt like it was pulling me toward it, like I needed to know what was down there. I reached for the doorknob, but Rachel's voice stopped me. "Don't." I turned around, and she was standing now too, her face pale as a sheet. "Don't go down there," she repeated, her voice shaky. "Please." My heart was pounding in my chest. "Why not?" She didn't answer. Neither did Ben. They just stood there, staring at me with this look in their eyes like they knew something I didn't. I hesitated for a second, my hand still hovering over the doorknob. The scratching had stopped, but the silence was even worse. "Okay," I said slowly, backing away from the door. "But seriously, if you guys are messing with me, it's not funny." Ben shook his head, his face serious now. "We're not. Just leave it alone." The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I didn't want to push it, but I also didn't want to stay any longer than I had to. After that whole basement thing, I knew I had to get out of there. My gut was screaming at me to leave, and the vibe in the room was straight up suffocating. Ben and Rachel were both acting strange, like they were hiding something, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. But I also didn't want to make things weird, so I decided to come up with an excuse to leave. I just remembered I have to get up early tomorrow for work, I said, trying to sound casual as I grabbed my jacket off the back of the couch. "I should probably head out." Rachel looked relieved. *2 relieved. "Yeah, of course, no problem," she said quickly. "Thanks for coming over." But Ben wasn't so easy to convince. He stood up and blocked my way to the door, a tight smile on his face. "Come on, man. You sure you can't stay a little longer?" We were about to make dessert. I glanced at Rachel, who was still pale and avoiding eye contact. I wasn't about to get dragged into whatever weird thing was going on here, so I shook my head. "Nah, I'm good. I really should get going." Ben stared at me for a moment, and for a second, I thought he was going to insist, but then he stepped aside. "All right, no worries. Maybe next time," he said, though his voice didn't sound as casual as his words. I headed for the front door, but then I remembered I didn't have my phone. I'd left it on the couch when I sat down earlier. "Wait, I left my phone," I said, turning back toward the living room. I scanned the couch where I'd been sitting, but it wasn't there. I checked the coffee table. Under the cushions, nothing. "Did you see where I put my phone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension creeping back in. Ben and Rachel exchanged another one of those weird glances. "Nope," Ben said, but his answer came too quickly. "You probably just misplaced it. We can help you look." Rachel stood up, her hands shaking as she started to lift the couch cushions. "Maybe it fell somewhere," she muttered, but her voice was shaky. I started to get that uneasy feeling again, like something was seriously wrong. It wasn't like me to lose my phone, and I was positive I had left it on the couch. But now, it was gone, and their reactions were making me even more suspicious. "I just had it right here," I said, frowning as I checked under the couch. "It doesn't make sense." Ben cleared his throat and gestured toward the hallway. "Maybe you left it in the kitchen or somewhere else. We can check the basement too, just in case." The basement. Of course, it came back to the basement. I could feel my heart start to race again as I glanced at the closed basement door. The last thing I wanted to do was go down there, but I also couldn't leave without my phone. Rachel looked at me, her eyes wide. "I'm sure it'll turn up," she said, almost pleading. "Maybe you should just come back tomorrow and look for it." Come back tomorrow? That made no sense. Why wouldn't we just find it now? My phone couldn't have just disappeared. "No, I'm going to find it now," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "I can't leave without it." Ben nodded, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me. "Let's check the basement, just in case," he repeated, heading toward the door. I hesitated, every part of me screaming that this was a bad idea. But what choice did I have? My phone was gone, and I needed it. So, despite every instinct telling me to just leave, I followed Ben to the basement door. He opened it slowly, and that same chill hit me again, the one I felt earlier when I first noticed the door was cracked open. The air from below felt colder, heavier, like there was something lurking just out of sight. "I'll check," Ben said, stepping onto the first stair. "You can stay up here if you want." "No," I said quickly. "I'll come with you." I didn't trust him enough to stay behind. If something was going on, I needed to see for myself. Ben flicked on the basement light, and we started down the stairs. The scratching sound was gone, but the silence was almost worse. Each step felt like it echoed in the small, cramped space, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone down there. Rachel stayed at the top of the stairs, her face pale as she watched us descend. The basement was cold and dimly lit, the light barely cutting through the shadows in the corners. I scanned the room quickly. There was no sign of my phone anywhere. "I don't see it," I said, already turning to head back upstairs. But then I heard it again, that same faint scratching sound coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. This time, it was louder. The scratching sound grew louder, coming from the far corner of the basement. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest as I strained to figure out what was making that noise. Ben just stood there, too calm for the situation. I didn't trust him, not anymore. "We should head back upstairs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my legs were already moving toward the stairs. "My phone's probably in the living room or kitchen." Ben didn't follow me right away. Instead, he lingered, his eyes locked on the dark corner of the basement where the noise was coming from. He seemed off, like he wasn't in any hurry to get out of there. "Let's just check over here," Ben suggested, ignoring my obvious discomfort. He gestured toward the far side of the basement, where old boxes and random junk were piled up. "Your phone might have fallen behind something." My gut screamed at me to leave, but I was stuck in that awkward moment where I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't want to accuse him of anything or look like a paranoid fool, so I hesitated. Against every ounce of better judgment, I followed him deeper into the basement. The air down there was even colder, and that scratching sound, it felt like it was getting closer. Ben crouched down by the pile of boxes, rummaging through some old tools and random junk. I wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, though. My eyes kept darting to that dark corner. I didn't want to get any closer, but I could swear something was moving just beyond the shadows. The noise scratched against my nerves, unsettling and continuous. "I don't think it's here," I said, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. My voice shook, and I hated that it gave away just how freaked out I was. "Let's head back upstairs." Ben didn't answer right away. He kept sifting through the clutter, as if he hadn't heard me. Then, after a long pause, he stood up slowly, turning to face me. His eyes had this strange glint in them, like he knew something I didn't. "All right, we'll head up," he finally said. "But you should really stop worrying. There's nothing down here." I didn't believe him for a second. We made our way back to the stairs, but just as we reached the first step, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There, on one of the shelves, was my phone. It was sitting in plain sight, like someone had placed it there intentionally. "That's impossible," I muttered, walking over to grab it. "I didn't even come down here before." "How did it?" Ben didn't answer. He just watched as I picked up my phone, his expression unreadable. I checked my phone immediately. The battery was nearly dead, which was weird because I had charged it before coming over. But the strangest part? There was an open text message I didn't remember sending. It was to Ben, and all it said was, "Help me." My blood ran cold. I hadn't sent that message. My phone had been in the living room the whole time, or so I thought. I turned to Ben, my hand gripping the phone tightly. "Did you see this? How did my phone get down here?" Ben didn't answer right away, and that silence felt like it stretched forever. Then, in the creepiest, most nonchalant voice, he said, "You must have dropped it, or maybe you brought it down here without realizing it. Happens all the time." That didn't make sense. Not even a little bit. At that moment, I knew I needed to leave. Something wasn't right with Ben, and I wasn't going to stick around to figure out what it was. I shoved the phone into my pocket and turned toward the stairs. Rachel was still standing at the top, her face pale as she watched us come up. Her eyes darted between me and Ben, but she didn't say anything. "We're good," I said, trying to keep things normal, but my voice came out shaky. "I found my phone." Rachel looked relieved, but Ben didn't seem to care. He just shrugged, acting like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had happened. Something I couldn't explain. As I stepped into the hallway, I couldn't help but glance back toward the basement one last time. That scratching sound had stopped, but the cold, eerie feeling remained. It was like the house itself was trying to warn me about something, and I had no idea what. But I wasn't about to stick around and find out. "I think I'll head home," I said quickly, already moving toward the door. "Pay for dinner, guys. I'll catch up with you later." Rachel didn't argue. She just nodded, her face still pale and strained. But Ben? Ben just stood there, smiling that weird smile of his, watching me go. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wave, but I didn't care. I was out. I was safe. At least I hoped I was. I walked out of their house that night, trying to shake off the feeling of dread crawling up my spine, but it clung to me like fog. Even though I was outside, breathing in the cold air, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep inside me. Something was wrong in that house. Really wrong. And I didn't know what. But that should have been the end of it, right? I should have just gone home, locked the door, and tried to forget about it. Except I couldn't. I spent the rest of the night thinking about that message on my phone, the one I didn't send. Help me. Who had sent it? And why? The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I wasn't imagining things. There was something in that basement, and Ben and Rachel knew it. But what was I supposed to do? Go back and ask them? Demand answers? I knew that wouldn't work. They were hiding something, but they weren't going to tell me what it was. The next day, I tried to go about my usual routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I avoided walking past their house, and every time I glanced over, I felt that same eerie tension building up inside me. It was like their house had become some kind of black hole, sucking me in, making me think about things I didn't want to know. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. So, I went back. It was late afternoon when I knocked on their door. This time, I didn't get a casual invite. Ben answered, but he looked different. His usual friendly smile was gone, replaced by something more guarded, like he wasn't sure whether to let me in or tell me to leave. "Hey," I said, trying to keep things casual. "I left something here the other night. Mind if I come in and look for it?" I didn't leave anything. It was a lie, of course, but I wasn't about to just ask them what they were hiding. I needed a reason to get back in that house. Ben hesitated for a second, his eyes narrowing like he was trying to figure out if I was lying. Sure, come on in, he finally said, stepping aside to let me through. Rachel was sitting on the couch when I walked in, and she immediately tensed up when she saw me. Her eyes flicked over to Ben, and I could see the worry in them. Whatever was going on, she was scared. I could feel it. "What did you leave?" she asked, her voice strained. "Just a pair of headphones." I lied again. I think I might have dropped them in the basement when I was looking for my phone the other night. At the mention of the basement, Rachel's face went pale. Ben shot her a look, but she quickly looked away. That was all the confirmation I needed. There was definitely something down there. "I'll just be quick," I said, moving toward the basement door without waiting for an answer. Ben didn't stop me, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. The door creaked as I opened it, and that same cold draft hit me in the face, even stronger than before. I flicked on the light and started down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was just as I remembered it, dark, cold, and full of shadows. But this time, something felt different. The air was heavier, almost suffocating, and that scratching sound was back. Except now, it wasn't faint. It was loud, echoing through the room like nails scraping against concrete. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, my pulse racing. I could feel it deep in my bones. Something was down here with me. Slowly, I moved toward the far corner, the same spot where I had heard the noise last time. My phone's flashlight flickered across the walls, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. And then I saw it. At first, it looked like a pile of rags shoved into the corner. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't rags. It was a trapdoor. The wood was old, almost rotten, and the edges were scratched and worn, like someone or something had been clawing at it from the inside. I crouched down, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The scratching had stopped now, replaced by a low, faint thudding sound, as if something was knocking from beneath the door. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there, to leave that trapdoor alone. But I couldn't. I'd come too far, and I needed to know what was down there. I gripped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hole beneath the floor. The smell hit me first, damp, musty, like the air down there hadn't been touched in years. I shined my flashlight into the hole, but it barely cut through the darkness. And then I saw movement. Something was down there, just out of reach of the light, shifting in the shadows. I couldn't make out what it was, but I could hear it now, a low, raspy breathing, like whatever was down there was waiting for me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my ears. I slammed the trapdoor shut and backed away, my hands shaking. I didn't know what I had just seen or heard, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't supposed to be down here. "Find your headphones?" Ben's voice came from the top of the stairs, making me jump. I looked up and there he was, standing at the top of the stairs, watching me with that same strange look in his eyes. "No," I said quickly, moving toward the stairs. I'll come back another time." Ben didn't say anything as I hurried past him and out of the basement. But as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew exactly what I had found down there. And he wasn't going to let me get too far away from it. I bolted out of the basement, my heart still pounding, but Ben was already standing at the top of the stairs, blocking my way. His face was unreadable, like he knew exactly what I had just seen, or worse, what I hadn't seen. He stepped aside without a word, but the silence was deafening. I moved past him, feeling his eyes on me as I did. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to walk, trying to act like everything was normal, like I hadn't just found a hidden trapdoor in his basement with something, or someone down there. When I reached the living room, Rachel was still on the couch, but she was different now. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days, and her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. She didn't say a word, just stared at me with wide, anxious eyes. "You find what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded quickly, even though I hadn't. "Yeah, just gonna head home." Rachel glanced at Ben, and I caught the look they exchanged, a silent, nervous conversation that sent a chill down my spine. They were hiding something. I was sure of it now. But whatever it was, I wasn't sticking around to figure it out. I'll come back later if I left anything else, I muttered, already heading toward the front door. I just needed to get out of that house. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, my whole body tensing up, but when I turned around, it was just Ben. His hand rested on my shoulder, a little too firm, and that strange, almost forced smile was back on his face. "You sure you don't want to stay for a bit?" he asked, his voice calm but wrong. "We could all hang out for a while. It's been a while since we had a real conversation." The way he said it, like a demand disguised as an offer, made my stomach churn. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, I really gotta go. Maybe another time." He didn't move his hand right away, and for a second, I thought he wasn't going to let me leave. I could feel the tension in the room growing, like something bad was about to happen. Rachel hadn't moved from the couch, but she was watching us, her fingers digging into the fabric like she was bracing for something. Finally, after what felt like forever, Ben let go. "All right, man," he said, stepping back. "See you around." I didn't waste any time. I yanked the door open and practically sprinted out into the cool evening air. I could hear the door close behind me, but I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my heart racing, my mind spinning with everything I had just seen and everything I hadn't. By the time I got back to my house, I was shaking. I locked the door behind me, double-checking every window and door to make sure they were secure. I didn't know what was going on in Ben and Rachel's house, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About that trapdoor in the basement, the scratching noises, the thudding, and the shadowy movement I had seen or imagined in the darkness. And then there was that text message on my phone. "Help me." I couldn't explain any of it, but the more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I needed to know the truth. Something was wrong in that house, and I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen. But that night, things got worse. I had just finished locking everything up when my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, expecting another random spam text, but when I saw the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a text from Ben's number. "Come back." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go back, not after what I had seen, or what I thought I'd seen. But something about the message pulled at me. It was like I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I tried to ignore it. I turned off my phone, put it face down on the counter, and sat down on the couch, trying to calm myself. But the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. I kept thinking about that basement, about what might be behind that trapdoor. Every creak in my house made me jump, and every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking. After about an hour of trying and failing to distract myself, I heard it, a faint knock at my door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was too late for visitors. My first thought was that it had to be Ben or Rachel, but I didn't want to believe it. I slowly stood up and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting to see Ben standing there with that strange smile on his face. But there was no one. Just as I was about to turn away, the knock came again. This time louder. I jumped, my hands shaking as I backed away from the door. I didn't know what to do. Should I open it? Should I call someone? But before I could decide, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, and there was another text from Ben's number. "It's waiting for you." That was when I knew something was horribly wrong. I stood there, staring at my phone, my heart racing. "It's waiting for you." Those words burned into my mind. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. I couldn't think straight. My gut was telling me to leave, to get as far away from Ben and Rachel as I could. But the knocking at my door, it hadn't stopped. It was still there, louder now, persistent, like whoever was on the other side wasn't going to go away until I opened it. I took a deep breath and backed away from the door, my mind racing. There was no way I was opening that door, not after everything that had happened. I didn't know if it was Ben, Rachel, or something else, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Another loud knock echoed through the house, and this time, it wasn't just a knock. It was followed by a scraping sound like nails scratching down the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my keys off the counter and made a beeline for the back door. I wasn't going to confront whoever or whatever was outside. I was going to get in my car, drive, and not look back. But as I reached for the back door, I heard the front door creak. My heart skipped a beat. The door was locked, but I could hear it shifting as if someone was slowly pushing against it. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I couldn't see who or what was on the other side of the front door, but I could hear the sound of something sliding across the wood. The scraping, the soft knock, it wasn't just at my door. It was inside my head now, filling my thoughts. I yanked open the back door and bolted outside, not even bothering to lock it behind me. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from the house. My car was parked in the driveway, and I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached my car, I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get them into the lock. My mind was screaming at me to move faster, to get in and drive away, but my body wasn't cooperating. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, I managed to unlock the car and threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, locking it immediately, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I felt a brief wave of relief wash over me. But that relief didn't last. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement behind my house. Something was there, watching me. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could feel it. I didn't wait to figure out what it was. I floored the gas pedal, peeling out of the driveway and speeding down the street. I drove for what felt like hours, not sure where I was going, but just needing to put distance between myself and Ben's house. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me, but the road behind me was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was following me, watching me. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town. My hands were still shaking as I parked the car and tried to catch my breath. I grabbed my phone to call anyone, but when I unlocked the screen, I saw it. Another message from Ben's number. "You can't run." My blood went cold. I hadn't given Ben my number recently, and I had no idea how he had been texting me. It didn't make sense. It was like the messages were coming from somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't escape. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, my mind spinning. What was happening? Why was this happening? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call or where to go. I felt trapped, like there was no way out. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, and another text popped up. "Come back. It's waiting for you in the basement." That did it. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, refusing to even look at it anymore. I was done. Whatever was happening, I wasn't going back. There was no way I was going anywhere near that house again. I sat there in the car, trying to calm myself down, but the sense of dread wouldn't go away. I could feel it creeping up my spine like something was coming for me, getting closer with every passing second. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay there. I needed to keep moving. I needed to stay ahead of whatever it was that was trying to pull me back. I started the car again and drove off into the night, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stop. As I drove, I glanced at the phone on the seat next to me. I didn't want to pick it up, didn't want to see any more messages. But the curiosity was gnawing at me, the need to know what was happening, what was waiting for me back in the basement. Finally, I grabbed the phone against my better judgment and opened it. There was one last message, and when I read it, my blood froze. "We never left." It wasn't signed by Ben. It wasn't signed by Rachel. And suddenly I realized it had never been them at all. I drove through the night, my mind racing as the world outside blurred into a dark, indistinguishable mess. My phone lay on the passenger seat, the last message still glaring at me. "We never left." I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was behind this was closing in on me. My thoughts kept circling back to that basement, to the message, and to the creeping realization that something was very wrong. By dawn, I found myself at a small motel on the edge of town. I was exhausted both physically and mentally, and I needed a place to regroup. I checked in quickly, trying to ignore the odd looks from the clerk, who seemed to sense that something was off about me. I took my key and stumbled to my room, my legs feeling like lead. Inside the room, I locked the door and collapsed onto the bed. My phone buzzed again, and I hesitated before picking it up. It was another message from Ben's number. "You're not safe. You have to see the truth." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. I didn't want to go back to that house. I didn't want to confront whatever was waiting for me. But the messages, the feeling of being watched, the desperate need to understand, it was too overwhelming. I had to know the truth. I took a deep breath and decided to call the local police. I needed help, someone to back me up. I dialed the number, my hands shaking, and when I finally got through, I explained everything: the strange messages, the noises, the basement. The officer on the other end listened patiently, but seemed skeptical. He told me to stay put and that they'd send someone to check on the house, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. I needed to see for myself. After hanging up, I grabbed a few things and headed back to my car. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I couldn't ignore the pull to return. I drove back to Ben and Rachel's house, my mind racing with possibilities. What was really going on? Why were they sending me these messages? When I arrived, the house looked the same as before, but the eerie feeling was even stronger now. I parked a few houses down and walked over quietly, trying to avoid being seen. The last thing I wanted was to draw attention. I approached the house from the side, moving carefully toward the back. The basement door was still locked, but the trapdoor had been slightly moved, as if someone had been down there recently. I took a deep breath and pried it open, my flashlight in hand. The basement was dark and musty, just as I remembered, but now there was something different. It was quieter. The scratching noises had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. I moved cautiously, shining my light around, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, just the same old basement with its cobwebs and clutter. I hesitated for a moment, but then I heard it, a faint sound like someone whispering coming from the far corner of the basement. I moved toward it, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner, was a makeshift bed of old blankets and cardboard. It looked like someone had been living there, and next to it was a series of photographs pinned to the wall, a collage of pictures that made my stomach turn. In the photos, I saw Ben and Rachel, but not in the way I'd seen them before. They were different, older, worn out, with haunted expressions. And in several of the pictures, they were with someone I didn't recognize. A man with a face obscured by shadows, who seemed to be lurking in the background of almost every shot. I felt a wave of nausea. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Ben and Rachel weren't just hiding something. They were part of something much darker, something they couldn't escape. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small desk in the corner, covered in scattered papers and documents. I rifled through them quickly, and among the papers, I found something that made my heart stop: a journal. I flipped through the pages, and what I read made my blood run cold. The journal detailed a series of experiments and notes, all centered around a concept called mental imprinting. According to the entries, the person or entity behind the experiments could manipulate and control perceptions, creating illusions and feeding on fear. The journal also mentioned that once a person was targeted, there was no escape because the fear was implanted, not real. I understood now. The messages, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, it was all part of the manipulation. Ben and Rachel were victims, just like me. They had been caught in this web of fear and control. And now, it was my turn. Just as I was about to leave, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room, and saw Ben and Rachel standing at the top of the stairs. Their expressions were a mix of fear and resignation. "You shouldn't have come back," Ben said quietly, his voice filled with despair. "It's not safe. It's been waiting for you." Rachel's eyes were filled with tears. "We tried to warn you. We didn't want this for you. It feeds on our fear, makes us see things that aren't real. It's how it survives." I took a step back, feeling the cold sweat on my skin. What is it? What's controlling all of this? Ben and Rachel exchanged a glance, and then Ben spoke again. "It's not a what, it's a who. Someone who knows how to manipulate minds, how to create fear and control us from the shadows. It's been playing us against each other." I felt a surge of anger and desperation. How do I get out of this? How do I escape? Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling. You have to confront it. Face it directly. It won't let you go until you do. I nodded, determined to end this nightmare. I took a deep breath and turned toward the darkness of the basement, ready to confront whatever was waiting for me. As I descended the stairs, I felt the presence growing stronger, the fear pressing in on me from all sides. But this time, I wasn't going to let it control me. I was going to face the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. And as I stepped into the darkness, I knew that I had finally come face to face with the true horror of my experience.